What if I told you that the religion many people consider the oldest in the world, a faith born in ancient Persia over 3,000 years ago, believed something so radical about human choice that it changed the course of all spiritual thought that came after it? And what if I told you that some of the most beloved, most followed religions on earth quietly believe the opposite? That your choices are already written, your path already sealed, but they never quite say it out loud? This is not a philosophy lecture. This is a story about something that every human being has felt, that pull between feeling like you are the author of your own life and feeling like something larger than yourself has already decided how it ends. And the ancient world did not agree on which one was true. Welcome back to First Beliefs. I am so glad you are here. If you are new to this channel, this is a place where we go deep. We do not do surface level. We do not do 5 facts about ancient Egypt. What we do here is sit with the big questions that humanity has always been sitting with, and we trace them back to their roots. Because I believe that understanding where our ideas came from changes how we hold them. Today we are talking about faith and free will. Now, before you think, oh, this is a philosophy topic, I want you to stay with me because I am not approaching this as a philosopher. I am approaching this as a storyteller and as someone who comes from a tradition, the Persian tradition, that sits right at the center of this ancient debate. I grew up surrounded by a culture shaped by Zoroastrianism, even if many people in my family never spoke that word. The way we talked about good and evil, the way we thought about choices and consequences, the way we understood what it meant to be human, all of that was shaped by a prophet named Zarathustra who lived somewhere between 1500 and 1000 years before the Common Era. Some scholars say even earlier, and what Zarathustra taught about human choice was extraordinary. Arguably, it was the most radical thing any religious thinker had said up to that point in history. But let me not get ahead of myself. Let us start at the beginning. Before we can understand what the ancient world thought about free will, we have to understand what most people believed before the concept of free will even existed as an idea. And for that, we go to Mesopotamia, ancient Sumer, Babylon, Akkad, the civilizations that emerged between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now modern-day Iraq. These were sophisticated, literate, deeply spiritual people. They had gods, many gods. And they believed that human beings had been created with a very specific purpose: to serve the gods, to feed them through ritual, to maintain the cosmic order. In Sumerian mythology, humans were made from clay and the blood of a slain god, specifically so that the gods would not have to labor anymore. In this worldview, you were not the protagonist of your own story. You were more like a character in a script that the gods had already written. Your fate, what the Babylonians called your shimtu, was assigned to you. It was decreed. It was sealed. The gods would meet, and this is a stunning image, at the beginning of each year, and they would write the destinies of all human beings on what ancient texts called the tablets of destiny. What would happen to you, what you would suffer, what you would receive. It was not a suggestion, it was not a guideline, it was law. Now, you might be asking, then what was the point of prayer? What was the point of ritual, of offerings, of all the religious practice these people engaged in? And this is where it gets interesting, because the Babylonians believed that even fate could be negotiated, not overturned, not canceled, but delayed, softened, slightly redirected. If the gods were pleased with you, a skilled diviner, a priest who could read the omens in the liver of a sacrificed animal or in the patterns of the stars, could sometimes warn you that fate was coming and help you prepare, but they could not stop it. The great poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh, carries this grief throughout its entire narrative. Gilgamesh is 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. He is the greatest king who ever lived, and yet he cannot escape death. He watches his beloved companion Enkidu die. He goes to the ends of the earth searching for immortality. He fails. The lesson of the poem is stark and ancient. Even the greatest human being is still bound by the decree of the gods. Fate wins. This was the dominant spiritual worldview across much of the ancient Near East, and it makes a kind of sense. If you live in a world of floods and droughts and invasions, if your life can be upended by forces entirely beyond your control, then maybe it feels true that the cosmos is simply indifferent to your preferences, that something larger than you has already decided. But then, and this is the rupture, someone came along and said, no. His name was Zarathustra. In the Greek tradition, he was known as Zoroaster. He was a priest, a prophet who lived on the Iranian plateau sometime in the Bronze Age or early Iron Age. The exact dates are debated. Some scholars say he lived around 1500 before the Common Era. Others say 1200. Some argue even earlier. What we know is what he left behind, a collection of hymns called the Gathas, written in an ancient form of the Iranian language, so old it is close to the Sanskrit of the Vedas. These are some of the oldest religious texts in the world, and what they contain is a worldview that, for its time, was absolutely radical. Zarathustra said, there is one supreme God. He called this God Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. This was itself revolutionary, but not the most revolutionary thing. The most revolutionary thing was what Zarathustra said about human beings. He said that the universe is caught in a cosmic struggle between two primal forces, Asha, which means truth, order, righteousness, and Druj, which means lie, chaos, deception. Ahura Mazda represents Asha, and there is an opposing force which in later Zoroastrianism became personified as Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Now here is the part that changes everything. Zarathustra taught that every human being, at every moment, has a choice. You can align yourself with Asha, with truth, with goodness, with the cosmic order, or you can align yourself with Druj. And the consequences of that choice are real. They matter. They shape not only your life, but the life of the world. In the Zoroastrian understanding, human beings are not servants of fate. We are moral agents, participants in the great drama of the cosmos. Our choices are not cosmically irrelevant, they are cosmically necessary. Ahura Mazda needs us to choose good. The outcome of the great struggle between truth and lie is not predetermined. It depends, in part, on what we do. I want you to really feel how different this is from what we just discussed in Mesopotamia. In Babylon, your fate is written on a tablet by gods who may or may not care about you. In Zarathustra's vision, you are a moral participant in the universe. You have been given Vohu mana, good mind, the capacity to reason, to discern, to choose, and Ahura Mazda respects that capacity so deeply that he will not override it. He does not force you to be good. He invites you. This is, arguably, one of the first fully developed theologies of free will in human history, and it had consequences that rippled across centuries. When Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, himself Zoroastrian, conquered Babylon in 539 before the Common Era, the Jews who had been in exile there encountered Persian theology. Scholars have long noted the parallels between later Jewish thought, the growing emphasis on individual moral responsibility, the Satan figure as an opposing cosmic force, the resurrection of the dead, the final judgment, and Zoroastrian ideas. The flow of ideas between these traditions is not a coincidence, it is contact. Zoroastrianism planted a seed that would eventually bloom in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam. The idea that human choices are real, that they are morally weighted, that they determine something about your eternal fate. But here is the thing about seeds. They do not always grow in the same direction. At roughly the same time that Zarathustra was developing his theology on the Iranian plateau, something very different was taking shape in the Aegean world. The ancient Greeks had a concept called Moira, fate, destiny. It was not a god exactly, it was more like a cosmic principle, a force so fundamental that even the gods could not fully override it. Homer depicts Zeus himself glancing at the scales of fate to see what is destined for a hero before deciding whether to intervene. And then there were the Moirai, the three fates. Clotho, who spun the thread of life. Lachesis, who measured it. Atropos, whose name literally means she who cannot be turned, who cut it. From the moment you were born, these three had already decided the length and the character of your life. Greek tragedy is built on this. The entire dramatic engine of works like Oedipus Rex depends on the terrifying truth that you cannot escape what is decreed for you. Oedipus runs from the prophecy. Everything he does to escape it drives him directly into it. The audience watches already knowing. That is the horror. Now, the Greeks were not simple. They were not crude fatalists who thought nothing mattered. The very existence of tragedy as a genre implies moral weight. It implies that choices lead somewhere. Oedipus makes choices. Agamemnon makes choices. Clytemnestra makes choices. Those choices have terrible consequences. But there is a different quality to the Greek understanding of fate versus the Zoroastrian one. In Zoroastrianism, the good outcome is genuinely possible. You can choose truth. The cosmos can be redeemed. The light can win, in part because of what you choose. In Greek tragedy, even when you choose well, fate finds a way. The gods can be capricious. A hero can be righteous and still be destroyed, not because of any moral failing, but because Moira has already decided there is something pitiless about it. The Stoic philosophers Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca tried to resolve this tension in a fascinating way. They said, accept what you cannot control. The external world is governed by fate, by the logos, the rational principle underlying all things. But your inner world, your judgment, your response, that is yours, that is free. This is one of the most elegant answers to the fate versus free will problem ever proposed. You do not control what happens to you. You control how you meet it. And in that meeting, you are fully human, fully free. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, wrote his meditations not for publication, but as private notes to himself. And again, he circles back to this. Do not be troubled by what lies outside your power. Return to what is inside, your character, your response, your choices in how you face what fate has handed you. It is beautiful. And it is deeply different from the Zoroastrian vision, where your choices do not merely shape your inner life, they literally shape the cosmos. Now we come to the traditions that are most familiar to the majority of people watching this video. And I want to be honest with you here. This is where the debate gets the most complicated, and in some ways the most unresolved. Because all three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, affirm both divine omniscience and human free will, and they have never fully resolved the tension between those two things. Let us start with Judaism. The Hebrew Bible is full of human choice. Adam and Eve choose to eat the fruit, Cain chooses to kill Abel, Abraham chooses to leave his homeland, Moses chooses to lead the people. The prophets plead with Israel to return, to repent, to choose differently. The entire Deuteronomic theology is built on a conditional. If you obey, you will be blessed. If you do not, you will suffer consequences. That structure implies genuine choice. The Talmud records Rabbi Akiva saying something that is almost paradoxical but deeply moving. Everything is foreseen and freedom of choice is given. Both are true. Simultaneously, the rabbis did not try to fully explain this. They held the tension. In the medieval period, Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides wrestled with it explicitly. If God knows what I will choose before I choose it, is my choice real? His answer was nuanced. God's knowledge does not work like human foreknowledge. It does not cause the future, it contains it without determining it. This is a philosophical move, not a proof, but it is an elegant one. Christianity inherited this tension and, if anything, amplified it. The Apostle Paul, writing in his letter to the Romans, introduces the concept of predestination, the idea that God, before the foundation of the world, chose some people for salvation. He compares God to a potter who makes some vessels for honor and some for dishonor, and asks rhetorically, "Who are you to question the potter?" This was explosive, and Christianity has been fighting about it ever since. In the 4th and 5th centuries of the Common Era, a British monk named Pelagius traveled to Rome and taught something remarkable. Human beings have genuine free will given to them by God, and they can choose to do good without divine intervention. Grace helps, but the capacity for good is already there. The theologian Augustine of Hippo, North Africa, the same era, disagreed with ferocity. After the fall, Augustine said, "Human will is so corrupted that without divine grace, we cannot choose good. We are enslaved to sin. Salvation is entirely God's initiative, God's gift. We receive it or we do not, and God has known which from eternity." The church declared Pelagius a heretic. Augustine's view became the foundation of Western Christianity. And then, 1,000 years later, the Protestant Reformation tore this open again. John Calvin took Augustine's logic to its sharpest conclusion: double predestination. God has predetermined who will be saved and who will be damned, not based on foreseen choices, based solely on God's sovereign will. The elect are elect, the reprobate are reprobate. Nothing you do changes that. Jacob Arminius, a Dutch theologian slightly later, pushed back. He argued for a conditional election. God's foreknowledge includes your choices, and salvation is available to all who believe. These two positions, Calvinist and Arminian, are still argued in Christian circles today. Walk into any seminary, you will find this debate alive. And then there is Islam. The word Islam comes from the same root as the word for peace, but also submission, and submission to Allah's will is central to the faith. The Quran speaks with great force about the sovereignty of God. Nothing happens except by God's will. God is the knower of all things. He is the one who guides and who allows to go astray. The concept of Qadr, divine decree, is one of the 6 articles of faith in Sunni Islam. You must believe that God has decreed all things, good and evil. And yet, the Quran also insists on human accountability. Every soul earns what it has earned. People will be judged for their deeds. The day of judgment makes no sense unless choices are real. The Mutazilites, a theological school that flourished in the 8th and 9th centuries of the Common Era, argued vigorously for human free will, partly because they were committed to a rational theology where God's justice required genuine human agency. How can God punish someone for something they had no power to choose otherwise? The Asherites, the dominant tradition, argued that God creates all human acts, but humans acquire them. This idea of kasb, acquisition, is deliberately mysterious. It preserves divine sovereignty while gesturing towards something like human responsibility. What I find stunning is this. All 3 Abrahamic traditions descended from the same God, in many ways the same story, cannot agree on this. They have never agreed. The tension is irreducible. We cannot talk about this without going east. Hindu philosophy offers a perspective so different from what we have discussed that it almost dissolves the question entirely. In Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual philosophical school associated with the 8th century thinker Adi Shankaracharya, the self that thinks it is making choices is itself an illusion. There is only Brahman, the one undivided reality. The appearance of a separate person with a separate will making separate choices is Maya, illusion, cosmic play. So the question of fate versus free will presupposes a separate self. Dissolve the self, and the question dissolves with it. But other schools of Hindu thought took different approaches. The Bhagavad Gita, perhaps the most beloved spiritual text in India's history, wrestles with exactly this. On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the warrior Arjuna freezes. He does not want to fight. And the god Krishna, speaking as his charioteer, delivers an 18-chapter teaching on the nature of reality, duty, and the soul. Krishna tells Arjuna, act, but without attachment to the fruits of action. Do your dharma, fulfill your duty, but do not think that you are the ultimate doer. The eternal soul is not the agent. The action flows through you. You are an instrument. This is not quite fate, and it is not quite free will. It is something more subtle, an invitation to act fully while releasing the illusion of ultimate authorship. Buddhism adds another layer. The Buddha rejected the idea of a permanent, unchanging self, what he called anatta, no self. If there is no fixed self, who is the one whose will is free? And yet, Buddhism is deeply ethical. The entire Eightfold Path is a path of intentional, disciplined practice. Choices are made. They have consequences. The law of karma, which originally meant action, describes exactly how choices ripple through existence. What Buddhism does is locate the question differently. It is not asking whether your choices are determined by a cosmic force outside you. It is pointing to the very mechanism by which choices arise, habitual patterns, conditioning, the unexamined drives of mind. Liberation, in the Buddhist sense, is not freedom from fate. It is freedom from the unconscious repetition of patterns. It is the freedom of awareness. This, too, is a radical reframing. I want to bring this home because this is not just an academic debate. This is something that lives in you. I know it does. I know it because I have felt it myself. There are moments in life when it feels like something outside you has made a decision. You fall in love and it does not feel like a choice. You lose someone and it does not feel like it could have gone any other way. You find yourself in a situation, a career, a relationship, a country, a family, and you wonder, did I choose this? Was this chosen for me? Is there a difference? And there are other moments when the weight of your choices is crushing. When you look back and see the road you took versus the road you did not take, and you carry the responsibility of that fully. Both of these feelings are ancient. They are recorded in the earliest human writing. They are argued in the holiest of texts. Here is what strikes me. Having spent years sitting with these traditions, the religions that most strongly emphasize free will, Zoroastrianism, Armenian Christianity, Mutazilite Islam, certain schools of Judaism tend to create traditions where human ethical effort matters enormously, where the world can genuinely be better or worse depending on what people do. There is urgency, there is responsibility, there is the possibility of change. The traditions that most strongly emphasize divine sovereignty or cosmic fate, Calvinist Christianity, certain schools of Sunni Islam, Greek tragedy, the Babylonian worldview, tend to create a different kind of spiritual life, one marked by humility, surrender, awe, the recognition that you are not the center of the universe, that something infinitely larger is moving. Neither of these is wrong. They are addressing different human needs, different moments in the spiritual life. What Zarathustra gave the world was the insistence that both matter, that you can believe in a God who is sovereign and a universe with direction, and still insist that your choices are real, that they count, that you are not a pawn. What the Stoics gave the world was something equally precious. The recognition that even when you cannot change the outcome, you can change how you meet it. And that inner freedom is a kind of freedom that cannot be taken from you. What the Buddhist tradition offers is perhaps the most subtle gift of all, the invitation to look at the very machinery of your choosing, to see where your desires come from, to loosen the grip of unconscious patterns, to choose more and more from a place of awareness rather than reaction. I do not think there is a final answer. I think the question is the spiritual practice. There is an old Zoroastrian prayer, one of the most ancient on earth, called the Ashem Vohu. In translation, it says something like this: righteousness is the greatest good. It is happiness. Happiness belongs to the one who is righteous for the sake of righteousness, not for reward, not out of fear, not because fate demands it, but for its own sake. That is free will at its most refined. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, the freedom to choose the good, even when the good is hard, even when no one is watching, even when the outcome is uncertain. I think that is what all of these traditions are really trying to say underneath their disagreements, that something in you knows the difference between truth and its opposite, that something in you can turn toward the light. That this turning, however you understand it, however you explain it theologically, is the most important thing you will ever do. Whether the path was always going to lead you here, or whether you have just now chosen to walk it, you are here. And that is enough to begin. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for being someone who asks these questions. If this episode moved something in you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you remember something you had almost forgotten, I would love for you to share it. Not because I need the views, but because I genuinely believe these conversations matter. Welcome. Please subscribe to First Beliefs. We are building something here. This channel is for the spiritually restless, the intellectually curious, the people who sit with questions longer than they sit with answers. If that is you, you belong here. Hit that like button if this episode gave you something to think about. It helps more people find this content, and it means a great deal to me personally. And in the comments, I genuinely want to hear from you. Where do you land on this? Do you feel like your life has been shaped by fate? Or do you feel the weight of your choices in your bones? Have you experienced something that made you suddenly certain in either direction? Tell me. These comment sections are some of the richest conversations I have ever been part of, and I read every single one.